we're bang on time at 5:30. So I'm happy to welcome the workshop participants in this workshop today called Food Systems Visualizations that I'm co-hosting with my colleague Helena Korjonen, and that is facilitated by Mireille Riemelbos. That the talk was going to be recorded, but not the discussions afterwards. So here we go. I can see it starting, so we'll officially start now. So I'm Reckinger, the head of the project Sustainable Food Practices at the University of Luxembourg. And what we do essentially in this workshop, project, is that we strengthen sustainable perceptions and practices within the foodscape in Luxembourg. And we do this via a number of projects that I'm going to briefly talk to you about. And so in a very short nutshell, we do an analysis of Luxembourg's food system and its current transitions to understand challenges and also opportunities within production, retail, transformation, consumption, but also within governance. And generally speaking, we have a praxeological approach to understanding the motives and the activities, the practices of all actors within the system. So we actually talk to people who are innovative and to people who are more conventional and who have reasons as well to oppose certain things. So we're trying to understand really in depth from everybody's perspective where they're at and what is the reason and the motivation for people's positions. Here you can see the projects that we're conducting. First of all, among our core research projects, we do, as I said, interviews with stakeholders in the food system. We have another project, which is the one we're focusing on today, about visualizing foodscapes. So I'll get into that later. And we have another project about clarifying food labels. And we're also going to draw an example from that because that is in touch with visualization as well. Then we have collaborative projects where we are creating a sustainable shopping app with a supermarket and with Green IT at the university. We are co-creating Luxembourg's National Food Policy Council or Future Food Policy Council. It's not quite there yet. We're participating in assessment projects of farm level analysis and food system analysis called Sustainable. We have been involved also in land planning project perspective, imagining Luxembourg to be climate neutral by 2050. And also in terms of international collaborations, we are involved in an H2020 project about urban food initiatives and also regional canteens. This particular talk today is going to focus on food systems and can be envisaged as a dynamic multi-scalar and multi-sited foodscape. So we're trying to take into account the different scales that we can have, but also the different spaces where things happen, and we draw from visual tools for that. And our aim is to make the methodology and also the approaches allowing us to analyze the current state of the system more accessible and transparent to you. And so we're going to particularly have a look at interrelationships, pressure points, gaps, blockades, opportunities at the end of our infographics that we are currently creating. But for the moment, we're focusing on already the methodology of the first one, which is a descriptive one. So we're going to have two sections today. We're going to talk about, or I'm going to talk about the visual representation of Luxembourg's food system, which is designed to enhance food literacy and food sovereignty. So food literacy, meaning that actors become more enabled to make the right decisions, choose the right partnerships, get involved with pertinent stakeholders, that kind of thing. And food sovereignty is the more overarching goal of bringing Luxembourg's food system towards a more equitable and also very participative system, in fact, approach to bring things forward and to succeed the food system transition that is so necessary. And then in the second part, we're going to have a feedback moment on this visualizing food system complexities and intricacies, because I think I'm not revealing anything to say that this is not easy business. So for the moment, what exists in Luxembourg as representations of food systems are only geolocalized mappings, like the one that I'm showing there, which is done by an NGO. They have a project or program called Changement de Menu. And this is a research engine type function which has selected actors if you want to look at particularly transformators or at places where you can buy particular foodstuffs. You can look it up there. But this is not a pooled tool, and we have been participating in many stakeholder workshops with various actors, including citizens, professionals of the food value circuit, civil society actors, educational actors, many more, and they really express the need for a pooled place to see the food system information and complexity. And so we're trying to meet this need by producing two types of food system infographic: two descriptive state of affairs infographics, where we use specific icons for key elements for actors of the system, and also so one that's more synthesis and one that's going to be more detailed with additional information in blog windows and web links and so on. And in the second step, we are planning to use these descriptive infographics as basis to add analytical elements. And here we're going to have a more critical examination of the food system with a focus on positive and negative externalities, drivers, gaps, logins, leverage effects, and also with the idea of the happy ends that we would like to show pathways to sustainability and resilience. Today we're focusing on the descriptive infographics because the other ones are in the making. Sorry. So for setting this up, we have to think of two main elements. One is content and one is form. So regarding content, we have to consider which elements of the food systems are to be included. And we did an analysis of concepts of food systems in the literature. We also did empirical research in Luxembourg to double check and triple check all the actors that were necessary to have in there. And the form, of course, is the graphic design and how we go about it. I'm focusing on the content today. And so these food systems are more complex than just the value chain of the circuit. And we want to approach it in its entire complexity. And we consider food systems as anthropogenic landscapes that are examined in a local or regional context, and they are part of larger networks of food production, distribution, consumption, but also governance, and particularly they are interdependent. So we are including all actors from various spheres of food, and not only the more classical farm to fork type actors that one tends to think of, but also civil society actors, political actors, media and social media actors, educational ones, etc. So for us it's important to acknowledge really prominently that they are all embedded in larger ecological, economic, sociocultural and political structures and contexts. Most approaches that we found in the literature have a relatively narrow view of what a food system is. So they tend to focus on the food value chain, often from a linear perspective. That's an example that you see on the left of the slide. And they tend to equal food and agricultural value chain with food system. Those that go a bit further use a circular approach to the food and value chain, which is already more evolved and more corresponding to empirical realities, but it's still insufficient. We really want to consider the diverse actors and institutions of a given territory involved in all of these steps of producing, processing, distribution, but also governing and creating meaning and creating knowledge and funding and technically setting up. So in a word, also including the governance. And what we've done is that we have brainstormed and researched in depth both. When we started tackling this from both ends, we looked up the actors themselves and attributed them to categories of what they do, the activities. But we also double-checked it from the other end by starting from the activities to have a really solidly empirically qualified depiction for Luxembourg. And the fact that it's abstracted, so what I'm going to show you now on the next slide, the music is getting the suspense, is an abstracted view of this process, and it can be transposable to larger contexts, to other contexts. But the fact that Luxembourg is so small helps us to double check it from both ends. And so here you can see our synthesis of a systemic representation of Luxembourg's main actors. So we, as I said, have looked up both the actors and the actions, and we are not interested in linear extraction processes, but in a more circular representation of what happens in the center of the circuit, as you can see here on the picture. We have a central bit and we have an outside bit. The outside bit is beige and the center has got colors or blobs. This is the food supply circuit. That's the more classical thing that we're used to when we're thinking of food systems. You see the natural environment, pre-farming, input supply, farming, processing, wholesale, imports, retail, gastronomy, individual citizens, waste, and how those things feed together. For simplicity's sake, we didn't do cross linkages between all of them, but of course there are cross linkages between all of them. We represented also logistics and transportation with the lorries and the little warehouses between them. So this is essentially something that is not so unexpected. But it's not enough. If we only have this, then we wouldn't have a sufficient grasp of what the food system is, and we need to have deeper explanations of environmental and sociocultural added value, and that's why we really tried to do the most work on what's on the outside, because the circuit, the food supply circuit, is actively shaping and is also at the same time shaped by a broader food system with which constant interactions and negotiations occur. And the actors in the broader food system, here represented on the edges, are not commonly thought of as key actors, but in fact they are. And we identified some of them. I'm going to go into them a little bit. And we haven't represented them with colorful blobs for the reason that they are not so unified as the actors of the food economy themselves. The ones in the middle are really the ones that are producing and making and so on the food, whereas the other ones are the ones more on a meta or influential level, and they tend to be less unified with many more overlaps. And so we wanted to represent them in a more open way. And for instance, if we look at the infographic, we can see that there are educational, training and awareness raising actors with a number of subcategories each time. Also, like in the inside of the infographic, of course, we have two levels of activities, like a main activity and then kind of typical sub-activities. Business interests and professional corporations. We have non-profit, voluntary and community groups. These are for instance, NGOs or charities. Then we have research, various research institutes, but also, for instance, libraries where one can get information. We have governance and regulation, that is the more classical political influence and also administrative spheres. But you can see, really, if you represent it like this, is that they are one influence among many. Of course, they have more power than other ones, but still, they're not the only ones. So it's designed to show that there are multiple actors converging towards governance. Then we have financing, investment, and insurance actors for funding and for creating companies, etc. Marketing, advertisements, it's something that we notice a lot in our daily lives, media as well. Individual citizens, here they are a particular category. And we heard about this this morning as well, that we're not talking about consumers, but we're talking about citizens, and we have them twice in the infographic for the simple reason, and I think that is an example to show really the difference between the inside and the outside type of actors, is that if we look at citizens of what they do in the food circuit, then we have, well, the very start is breastfeeding, but they go shopping, they buy food, they cook, they grow maybe vegetables in their garden. That's how they contribute to the food economy. But as outside shaping actors, they do many other things. They create values on what is good. They do socializing. They do inclusion, exclusion. They perpetrate traditions. They instill cultural beliefs of what is healthy, what is tasty, and so on. So you see in the different kind of actions that citizens have, what is essentially the difference between the inside and the outside actors in the food system, and that we really need the outside actors to have a complete view. We also have operational services. I can also give other examples than the citizens. Here, for instance, educational actors are seen as part of the food system because they can provide comprehensive food literacy, making consumers aware of healthy, ecological, and socially just diets. Or otherwise, another example might be economic and political actors who can provide marketing opportunities, fair prices, and guarantees for farmers more sustainable produce. Or another example could be civil society, as well as political actors can advocate for higher standards on human rights or animal welfare or measures against biodiversity loss. So, to sum up, here is a vision where I just zoom into the outside actors to show you, to show you more, visually more clearly who we're talking about. But this is really just for pedagogical purposes that I'm doing this. So you can see, okay, they're sitting on the outside. That's how we see them, that they frame the actual food economy. But we prefer not to highlight them in those blobs that look a bit close, because they are so evolving and also overlapping. So to sum up, we have to recall that food systems are extremely complex, and the infographics must depict this complexity. And a local empirical insight perspective is crucial for this, to have a validated view about the processes at different level, and so that allows us to take into account also the broader vulnerability context that again shapes the system as a whole. So both the food supply circuit and the more shaping political, economical, cultural influences. So now we'd like to move on to the more interactive part of the session and chat to you